Right then, good afternoon everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, which is Gaining from Genetics, ASBVs specifically. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Leading Sheep Project and the Make More from Sheep Project. The Leading Sheep Project is AWI and Queensland Government DD funded with support from AgForce, and Make More from Sheep Project is a joint initiative of MLA and AWI. Today we have three people speaking to us about ASBVs. We have Luke Stephen, who's Project Officer from Merino Select Sheep Genetics, and we also have two producers, Mark Murphy from Kabula Gundawindi and Pat Hegarty from Kalanya Longreach. Luke Stephen will be speaking first. He'll be talking to us about how to read ASBVs, what the figures mean, what ASBVs are available and how to use them in your enterprise. And Pat and Mark will be speaking about how they use them on their properties and what impacts they've found and just how to get into them. So without any further from me, I will hand over to start today's webinar with Luke Stephen.
Okay, thank you Alex, and good afternoon everyone. Today, as mentioned, my name's Luke Stephen. I'm with Sheep Genetics, which is a joint program of AWI and MLA as well, and presenting under Making More from Sheep. And what I'm here to talk about today is the gain from genetics and how you can really use ASBVs to improve your production. Okay, so what I will talk about today, first of all, will be that genetic theory in practice and why ASBVs are important to be used in important selection decisions and not relying on raw figures alone. We'll look at the key traits that Sheep Genetics currently produces ASBVs for, and we'll then look at how they are interpreted. We'll move on then to look at which traits we should be looking at for which breeding operations, whether it be merinos, maternal breeds such as Cootless, Corriedale, Sams, or Doonies, and then or whether it be terminals, which is our Pole Dorsets, White Suffolks, Dorpers, etc. And then last of all, we'll look at where to find these animals, which will then give us a good overview to step into Mark and Pat's presentations later of how they practically use ASBVs in their relative operations. Okay, so in terms of genetic theory, farm production, when we're talking about that, it's this whole interaction of genetics and environment. So what we're talking about there is basically how many bales of wool you produce, so your genetics are, by the environment which they're running. And it's important to note that only the genetics is passed on to the progeny. Although we'd like a nice season every year, we don't always get it. So it's important that we have our genetics right to make the most of those opportunities. Okay, so when we look at when we're purchasing a ram and what influences that animal's performance, there's a number of factors. First of all, we have the feed. I'm fairly sure most of you will have seen animals that have been in a shed at a sale relative to those that have been running in the paddock and the difference in size between those. Also, those that are running on crop stubbles compared to those that are running on improved pastures. The age of the animal, so it's, if you're comparing an animal that's 6 months older than the other one, then you'd naturally expect it to look a bit bigger. The birth type and rear type, so there's a big difference there, whether an animal is a single or a twin in terms of how it looks and how it performs. The dam age, so maiden ewes generally aren't as good at doers as older ewes, and that can have an impact on how an animal performs. Whether the animal was subject to challenge, so if it's suffering from disease or parasites, that will knock the animal back a bit. And then finally, its genes. And what's good for the people that are selecting rams is that when known all that information, we call all the stuff I talked about before the environment, and we can account for that in genetic analysis and give you an indication of the genes which you are purchasing from your relative stud, which then, of course, we present in the way of Australian sheep breeding values. So we have Merino Select ASBVs for our Merino program and Lamb Plan ASBVs. Okay, so an example of this difference between environment by the different factors is micron. So how much an animal's been fed can have as much of an impact from 4 to 7 micron on an animal's wool tests. The quality of that feed as well, same again. how old it is, you can add an extra 0.3 of a micron per month. Whether it's a twin or single is a quarter of a micron. The maiden ewe, which we talked about earlier, is nearly 0.2 or 0.15 of a micron. Whether the animal is healthy for the whole period can have a massive effect. And also then whether that has been challenged and been set back at all. Whether the animal's been managed the same when you're looking at it. So once again, looking at that example of animals in a shed compared to animals in the paddock won't be doing as well. And then finally, genetics. So looking at Merino Select and looking at the finest animal in the database compared to the broadest for ASBV, 8.5 microns, which is fairly considerable. And it's this reason that we always suggest to people that raw measurements are that unreliable guide to genetics, and you really should be looking at the ASBVs as an accurate indication of how much of the genetics is going to be passed on and how that animal will perform. So moving on to ASBVs, they give you, the ram producer, the ability to compare rams, whether it's within a flock, so whether you're showing up to a sale and you're looking at a sale lineup, deciding which rams best meet your objective. They also enable you to compare across flocks, so you can look at a number of studs in a region and looking at their rams and knowing that you're comparing apples with apples. And in our terminal analysis, we have the ability to compare animals across breed. So we are able to compare Poll Dorsets, 2 White Suffolks, 2 Suffolks, 2 Dorpers. And that's important to note that that's in terminals only. At the moment, our maternal breeds are only comparable within breed. Okay, so with our ASBVs, we're talking about a quality assured system in terms of a highly accurate database. We use accredited technicians to record traits such as carcass scanning, wool tests, worm egg counts to make sure that we're getting the most accurate information. And we do this using pedigree and performance data submitted by the breeder. And the main thing with ASBVs as well is that they balance with visual selection when you're making your ram decisions. So they're a selection tool to be used in conjunction with visual selection, and they shouldn't be used as the sole guide for picking an animal. Okay, so if we move on now to the traits that we should be looking at, and we look at growth, what we're talking about here is kilos of live weight, and that's available for all stages, which I'll move on to shortly. The main thing that we need to watch when selecting for growth, while we always want heavier animals, for slaughter lambs and etc., we want to make sure that our birth weights don't creep up too high, and we also want to make sure that our mature ewe size doesn't get too big, because a too heavy a mutton is basically an inefficient mum because they're eating for survival and not for their lambs. Okay, so this shows all the relative age stages that we have in sheep genetics at the moment. So we go from birth right through to adult. For our merino breeders, most of all our wool traits are reported as yearling. For people that are selecting terminal or maternal rams, most of those are in that post-weaning stage. So looking at growth here as an example, as I mentioned earlier, we want better growth through that, pretty much from that weaning to hogget stage. So if it is our slaughter lambs, we can get them off as soon as possible. And just a reminder that we don't want our adult ewe size getting too big, or our birth weight's getting too heavy, so we're pulling a lot of lambs. Moving on to carcass traits, what we're talking about here is eye muscle and fat depth, and they're expressed in millimetres at the 12th and 13th rib. It's important that we opt to improve or optimise these because they do affect a range of traits, examples being increased muscle has shown to have a positive relationship with worm egg resistance, and also fat depth, positive fats dealing with reproduction, particularly in tougher environments, which some people in Queensland might be currently experiencing or do experience. So ultimately what we want to do there is increase muscle and optimise fat. Okay, in terms of fleece quantity, what we put out here in terms of breeding values is for clean and greasy fleece weight, and what we're talking about here is that percentage of wool cut, and we give these to the breeder from that yearling stage, so from about 12 months on through adult hogget and adult fleece measurement. Okay, so just a reminder that we want to increase these, and things that we need to watch when we get to the extreme fleece weights is issues such as fat, so that we're not stripping the fat off these animals and putting it all in their fleece. The fertility in terms of big cutters not necessarily being the most fertile, and also that our micron doesn't blow out with our increasing fleece weight. Okay, in terms of fleece quantity, what we currently put breeding bears out for is fibre diameter, staple strength and staple length. These are expressed in their relative units, whether it be micron, newtons per kiloton, or millimetres, and these are available from that 12 months on. So what we really need to be mindful of, particularly if we drive our micron down, is that our staple strength doesn't decrease. Our body weights don't go down as well as our fleece weight. In terms of staple strength, as long as we're increasing that, there are no seen undesirable characteristics. But as we increase our staple length, we want to make sure that we still have a good level of staple strength in the clip. Number of lambs weaned in terms of our fertility trait, what we're talking about here is deviations around that, how many lambs are weaned per 100 ewes joined for a sire. Relative to most of our other traits, this is harder to make progress as it's not as heritable, and we see that on farm. There are a number of factors that affect how many lambs are weaned, but genetics is a big one. There's massive differences we currently see in the Merino Select and Lamb Plan databases in terms of number of lambs weaned. So what we really want here is a high number of lambs weaned. Okay, so worm resistance. What we're talking about here is the ability to cope with worm burdens, and it's looking at an express percentage of worm egg counts per animal. Why we want lower animals here, obviously, because if our sheep aren't dead, they're obviously going to make us a lot more money. And also that if the animal is using its energy to fight a worm burden, they're not necessarily producing at the same rate as an animal that doesn't have to fight it. So a good worm resistance here obviously means that our production doesn't slow. So it's a trait that we should aim to decrease, particularly people based in summer rainfall areas. Okay, what is an index? So for some people, they mightn't find that all the ASBVs, individual ASBVs, are what they look at. They like to look at an index, and that's one value which is made by combining these ASBVs, and we put these out for a range of different breeding programs. It's a quick selection guide, but it is still important that you look at the ASBVs that make up an index, as there might be undesirable traits or performance for a trait that you're interested in. Okay, so if we're running a dual-purpose merino operation, some of the traits we should be interested in is our post-weaning weight, muscle and fat, so basically getting those animals up and going, so whether it is your wethers that you're slaughtering or getting rid of, that they're up to those specs. We want good fertility. Those animals that we shear, we really need to get fleece weight off them, so a higher clean fleece weight value there as well. And also worm egg count, so that we, our animals are performing pretty well. Relative indexes, we put out two dual-purpose indexes, being 3.5% and 7% micron, and we're not talking about percentage, that's just the micron premium. Okay, for just the merino breeders that are more focused on wool production, here our major focus needs to be our wool traits, so we're talking about clean fleece weight, fibre diameter and staple strength at that yearling age. That post-weaning growth will still have as an important trait, as it is important to get those animals up and going, and also that worm egg count. And through our indexes here, our 10% and 14% plus staple strength indexes are the desirable indexes here. So for the maternal breeds, fertility really is the #1 profit driver in these industries, so it's important that we look at number of lambs weaned there. And then obviously for our first cross lambs, particularly the weather portion, we want them at those acceptable carcass measurements straight away, so we want post-weaning weight, muscle and fat to be traits that we should be focusing on. Worm resistance once again coming in, and also greasy fleece weight, which we do put out for the maternal breed. You still do have to shear a lot of these animals, so it's, we might as well try and get as much of that product off to market to sell as possible. In terms of the indexes that we have available, the maternal dollar index and dual purpose dollar index are two good indexes to be using when looking at maternal rams. Okay, our terminal rams, it's all about carcass traits here, so we really need that post-weaning weight, muscle and fat to be our major traits of focus. Of course with a focus on birth weight so that doesn't creep up and we're not spending our Saturday mornings out pulling lambs instead of going off to play cricket. Worm egg count's pretty important as well, and also number of lambs weaned, so that we do have some fertility in those terminal lines. In terms of our indexes, our Carcass Plus and Lamb 2020 are two indexes aimed at the terminal people that are slaughtering animals, looking at early growth as well as those carcass traits. And the self-replacing carcass index is a self-replacing index of looking at for breeds such as the clean skins, such as Dorpers, that might be self-replacing and having some emphasis on fertility. Okay, so that's a quick overview of what an ASBV is and how to look at them, where to find them. And you can look at our website, which is www.sheepgenetics.org.au. And this is what the homepage of the Sheep Genetics website currently looks like. So for the website, you can search for any animal that's got ASBVs. We have the ability to compare how those animals rank to the database. And another interesting feature that we've put up recently is the ability to view upcoming sales, so that you, as a commercial producer, can look at the sales in your area, have the animals that are going to meet your breeding objective pre-selected to then go to the sale, and then look at how those animals match up to your visual appraisal. Okay, so wrapping up, ASBVs will accurately predict how rams will perform. We have them available for a range of traits, but ultimately it comes down to you, the producer, selecting the traits that impact your bottom line. For more information, please visit the Sheep Genetics website or the Gain from Genetics module, which is module 9 in the Making More from Sheep brochure. Thank you, Alex, once again for having us along today. I'll take any questions.
Righto, thanks Luke for that presentation. Does anyone have any questions at the moment? If you do, please click on the raise your hand button and we can ask them now. We can unmute you and ask. You can ask the question, otherwise we can move on to Mark. So just while we're getting Mark ready, if you do have any questions, please raise your hand for Luke. Otherwise we'll have another question time at the end of the webinar if you want to keep thinking about it. Righto, there's a question there from Hamish Holcomb.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. I'm just a bit confused about the percentage indicator on your on the indexes. Will that become more apparent as it goes on?
Yeah, okay.
The 7 and 10%, I just haven't grasped that.
Okay, so what we're talking about there, Hamish, is a micron premium. So if you reduce your clip by 1 micron, how big a percentage of your wool price does that go up by? So you know, for the broader wools, it might necessarily increase in price that much, whereas some of those fine wools, you know, dropping that micron can see a fairly significant increase in price. So what we do with our indexes there is that we have them geared that way so that for a trait like a dual purpose, an increase in, you know, a decrease in micron mightn't be as beneficial as it would be in a 10% or 14% staple fine wool index.
So the higher the percentage, the more important the effect of the change.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. The more effective fibre diameter has in those indexes. Whereas if you look at the dual purpose indexes and look at the animals that do well in them, they're high growth animals with good fertility as well and good fleece weight.
Thank you.
Right, and thanks for that, Luke. And we'll move on to Mark Murphy now. Mark's from Kabulla at Gundawindi. He's going to give a producer perspective.
Mark Murphy here. Just was asked to present a bit of an overview of what happens from a stud producer point of view on how we use ASBVs. This is a bit of a background of, we've got two studs here. Our program is breeding merinos that have a dual purpose with strong emphasis on carcass, wool and survivability characteristics. And one of the things that you do run into is that it can't be done, and that's just a load of crap. And you can produce very fit, healthy, fertile sheep that have good wool and carcass traits. And we do this by using, the simplest term that we've run into is ASBVs, which is the assistance of the Australian sheep breeding values, data that Luke has just gone over from Chip Genetics, and that helps manage the choices we use to speed up our genetic progress. Breeding values in most livestock industries, especially cattle and prime lamb, are becoming commonplace and have been very constructive. The merino industry is having difficulties taking up the idea, and the industry is struggling as a consequence. It has major paradigms on this particular issue. Merino breeders need to choose good quality productive rams using the systems available, plus visual appraisal. And that bottom line is very important. This is not the be-all and end-all. It is a tool to utilise. This data has come from Jason Tromp from Victoria. So this is the estimated percent of commercial producers and service providers using ASBVs. So in the merino industry, or specifically those a bit more orientated towards wool, it's roughly 5%. The dual purpose, so obviously you start to get in a bit of carcass. People that are interested, then that bumps up to about 10. Maternal prime lamb, 20. Terminal prime lamb, which is basically border lesters, 40%. Agents struggle, 15%. Sheep classes really struggle, 5%. And wool classes, well, you can give them away at the moment. By elevating traits, live weight, carcass, fleece, reproduction and disease resistance, we have identified advantageous genetic characteristics. It's a simple way to really focus on the comparison between sheep for various traits. It's pure and simple as that. Estimate the genetic potential of each sheep. It's sitting there in front of you. You can have a guide as to exactly what that animal is likely to produce. Been able to trace families within our studs and for various productive traits. Increase the depth of data from each sire and dam. So when we go to selecting our sires, we have it's not just the ram himself. We look at his background, what he's done, where he's coming from, what his mother's done in particular, because she has a huge impact on what his genetics is. Benchmarking and keeping the eye on the ball. So the benchmarking helps. One of the things that you get when you get ASBVs is accuracies. And the accuracies, as you put more and more data in, you become more and more, or you'll benchmark yourself more and more, that accuracy increases drastically. And that helps run the system. So in the data, for carcass, we identify the lambs which have higher fat scores. So to get to where we are, what we actually got to do is, at weaning time, we must weigh that lamb. And then at approximately 200, 250 days, there's an assessor comes in and re-weighs that weaner and does a fat and eye muscle depth. We also do a scrotal measurement as well. So that then gives us, that information goes to Sheep Genetics. The pedigreeing has already been done. Pedigreeing basically means that we've mothered up the lambs of 1,000 stud ewes. Takes a bit of doing, but the benefit out of it is huge for us and our clients. What we're able to do, the ASBVs, the one that we think is most important is the fat score. It's the first one that we look to, and it must be positive. The second one is eye muscle, and the eye muscle also must be positive. These two have a huge bearing on the fitness of the animal. Its ability to utilise feed and its efficiency with regards to handling worms and fertility. And this becomes more apparent, this is some of the research coming from Western Australia, it's very, very apparent when the season gets tighter, the gap becomes much, much wider. When benchmarking and introducing genetics, some people that were on a webinar a couple of weeks ago, I'll bring this up here a little bit later on, but there's a sizable difference in worm burden in lambs if they don't have the physical capacity to handle it. And this particular data will show a difference of 2% to 21%, and that's huge. That's straight out bottom line efficiency, lack of, simply because they don't have the fitness to handle a challenge. Live weight data is also obviously pretty important. We have discovered that highest ASBVs for weaning weight. This is what gives you your early lambs. We've got to be very competitive with the first cross lamb industry, and clients of ours are getting first and up to second cross lamb prices for their finished article to the butchers. That's what the game's all about. We've got to make more money. The bottom line is more dollars. In reproduction, the highest cradle measurement, obviously it's similar to cattle, produces a higher percentage of fertile or higher fertility level in the daughters of the rams. Now this is just something we put up a couple of weeks ago, and just, I won't stay on it very long, but what happens with the, this is just a bit of an idea. These are sires over here. There's 2 introduced sires down the bottom end here. This is the number of lambs that were born in this particular season to each rams. This is the number of lambs that required assistance, either didn't make it to weaning or needed major management interference to keep them alive. And as you can see, so this is high muscle fat score guys up here. So here's the eye muscle here. So as we're going down the line, this eye muscle is decreasing, and then you get down into negatives. Fat is the same. Here's the fat over here, positive, and then you get down into some negatives. And where you get into this negative territory is where you hit the problem line. That's it there. The WEC data is another ASBV, so this is the actual WEC data for these rams, but you'll find in our next graph that I've pulled 4 rams out, and these 2 guys here have very, very similar WEC data. Righto. So you would say the fitness level ought to be similar, but that is not the case. Here's one guy here whose lambs needed absolutely no assistance at all, another one 21%. And the major difference is the fitness levels of the sheep. Righto. There it is right there. These 2 rams down here, their ASBVs for their worms, it's 18, that's a good way apart. Negative is good, positive is not so good. But when we go across here, we find that one had a major problem and one was okay. And when you check the data out, you find that one's carcass data is not so good, and this fella here was okay. The reason I pull these 2 rams out is they are half brothers to each other. They are genetically very, very similar. But the carcass data is hugely different, and the result reflected that. This just gives you a bit of an idea of how we use the ASBV data. So this is a sire that we produced back in 2003. He's a twin. This is a son up here. Sorry, this is the same ram in the wool. This ram is still going strong. He's 2003 drop, so he's 8-year-old this year. Now this is a ewe. This photo was taken 6 months back in January this year, so she's season was pretty wet. She's actually a rising 10-year-old ewe this year, so this is the sire of the dam of this ram. And so we've just seen the parents. So this is the guy that we've bred to produce. Anyway, we've got another ewe joined to the above ram that we've just had, produces this ram, righto. So this is a young that's his 07. He's actually an 09 drop ram. Now, the reason I've just showed you the photos. That's what they look like, but this is how the data, and we're just concentrating on the carcass data. We haven't put the wool in here because you'll get a huge amount of information across here. So we're just trying to concentrate on what happens on the carcass side of it. So here's the first ram. Here's his weight. This is very high accuracies, up in the 90%. He's 6.9. Fat's fantastic. Muscle's brilliant. Eggs are okay. Dual purpose, really good. Cooking along. This is the ewe that he was joined to. Got a bit more wool characteristics, this ewe here, and this is the ram we produced. And this guy has been a huge impact sire in Australia. Weight 10, fat 1, muscle 2.6. This guy really makes things happen, righto? Got a little bit of an issue here. This should be better than it is, but his index is up on the 181 and cruising. So you take this ram here, and he gets joined to this ewe, righto? So again, we're trying to do, this is what we call a wool ewe. What we're trying to do is improve the wool characteristics of this guy. This is the ewe we've used. Her genetics for fat and muscle are terrific, but egg count is fantastic. And this is the last ram we've produced. Now this guy here's got his first lot of lambs on the ground this year, and they are cooking with gas. They look brilliant. Now this is the ram's data, so we will not be able to upgrade this data until his lambs start to come through later next year when the ASBVs come through. So all his fat and eye muscle, all his wool traits for all his progeny will come through. But this guy here looks like he's cooking with gas, and that's how we've used this information to breed this ram. ASBVs have assisted us in producing more good quality lambs. It's like baking a cake. You want to know what you're going to get every time, and we get basically no tail at all. It's brilliant. Heavier weaners, also giving multiple market options for our client base. So the weaners, even at lamb marking, our clients are telling us that the lambs are definitely heavier at lamb marking time. One of the things that it will be reflected there is an increase in lambing percentages, simply because the fitness levels of the lamb has increased. Better quality ewe base, you've got a lot more ewes to pick from. Away you go. An enthusiastic client base who want the data for ram selection. The guys that have been here a while just want more and more information. The people that have only just come along, it's like information overload. But the people that have been with us, male and female, are pushing us to get more and more information. That's how they utilise it. Results for us, the use of positive fat and muscle of ASBVs has increased fitness and production in our flock, and it can be easily identified with information from cheap genetics. It assists us in focusing on production and profitable traits. They're all dollar driven, and this helps us benchmark and drive where we're going. We have sheep that are trait leaders in the sheep genetics database. And take-home messages. ASBVs, it's sad that the industry is struggling to get their mind around it, and the part of the industry that's struggling is the stud breeder side of it. The ASBVs are and will be the way of the future. It's just a matter of commercial people getting on board and becoming more up to speed with how to utilise it, and the industry will be led by commercial breeders. You vote with your dollars. Where you spend your money is where the dollars will be recouped. And if you're buying rams from a stud that is not using ASBVs at all, ask them to get on board. Become part of their system. Get in, make it happen, because it will drive production in the future.
All right, thank you, Mark. Do we have any questions for Mark Murphy today? Mark, I've got one question. Out of your, I guess, people that buy from you, do a lot of them use the ASBVs, even though you provide them, obviously, but do a lot of people use them, or are they not?
Well, what happens with us, Alex, is that to have the information as up to date as possible, there's a big push to, look, there's some information will come in quite late before our sale. So our clients are pushing like hell to get that as quick as possible. So we tend to fax it out or email it out 10 days or so, week or 10 days before our sale, and they absolutely peruse it to the nth degree. And one particular bloke this time got here and absolutely broke a bull because he left his copy on the kitchen table at home. So they use it in a big way. They've got it all pretty well nutted out as to what they want to do, and we have an open day on about a week or 10 days before the sale, and X amount of them come to that to help them fine-tune what they want to do. But yes, they use it in a big way.
Right, and we'll keep on moving on to Pat. Thanks a lot, Mark, for that. It was very interesting. We'll move on to Pat Hegarty from Kalanya, Longreach.
Okay, thanks very much, Alec, for asking me to speak today. My name's Pat Hegarty, and along with my wife Sue and my family, we operate a property west of Longreach, between Longreach and Winton. Property's 13,500 acres, approximately 33,000 acres. We run around about 8,000 to 9,000 sheep here. We run entirely a sheep enterprise. We don't own any cattle at all, never have. We've stuck to the sheep all the way through. We do just a few cattle for other people, just for extra cash flow and to manage our pastures a bit better. I'll just give you a bit of an overview of our program, and then we'll go on to why we use the ASBVs. We've had this property 57 years. My father drew it in 1954 on a ballot, and we were using traditional rams right up until about 2000, the year 2000. At that stage I was getting very disillusioned with the sheep that we were running. They were small, they had a lot of skin on them, they had very bad constitutions, our lambings weren't good at all, they were shocking. And fortunately for us, we attended one of the SRS workshops that Jim Watts was running down at Blackhall in 2000, and I met Mark Murphy there. And straight away we started to class our sheep up along those lines. Mark came up here for about 6 or 7 years and classed up our sheep, and we started to see some vast improvement just from classing. You know, we reduced our micron by at least 2 to 3 micron down to 19.5, which we're sitting on at the moment as a flock average. We started to see a lot bigger, plainer body type of sheep coming through, and we were getting rid of the tail. We always had, for years, we had a real bad tail on all our mobs. So by being encouraged by what we were seeing through all this classing, we started to spend a bit more money on rams, and we started to learn more and more about this particular type of sheep. Our lambings were getting better, and the size of our lambs were getting better. We started to get really encouraged by it all, and through people like Mark Murphy, we started to learn about these ASBVs and what they could possibly do for us. So we started to sort of educate ourselves on them and try to understand them a lot more. For those of you who don't understand this area, it is a pretty harsh environment. We have a lot of very long, dry, hot spells at times with very poor nutritional value in the grasses. And that's really come home to people this year, because we had a huge wet last year at up to 27 inches here and up to 40 inches around Barcord. And people have been having shocking lambings and really bad lambings because the pastures just disintegrate so quickly, and the nutritional value in those pastures is very poor. So we want sheep that are going to perform in those conditions. We do a lot of supplementary feeding here, and we want to be feeding the right animals. It doesn't matter how much money you pour down a sheep's neck. If it's not the right animal, it's not going to perform on it. And in the last 18 months, we've spent up to $100,000 on feeding equipment to set ourselves up here to try and increase our production of the sheep that we're now breeding. But as Luke said earlier, you've got to have a combination of the environment and the genetics. I feel we can sort of manage the environment a little bit. You know, we can manage the ages of our sheep, we can manage the diseases and the parasites up to a certain degree, and we can manage the environment up to a certain degree by supplementary feeding. But in the past, I don't believe we've really selected the right genetics, and we've been pouring money down the necks of sheep that aren't really a profitable animal. So we decided to have a look into these ASBVs, and actually I'll just go back to that picture there on the front. My introductory picture is some of our ewes with the Carbula ram that we purchased off Mark last year. He is a very good ram, very good figures, and I'll show you them later on. And we joined that guy to 80 young ewes on his own this year. We're going to hopefully do some ASBVs on his progeny later next year. This ram here is a ram we purchased only this year in September from Mark, and we're sort of running a bit of a program here where we're trying to breed some of our own flock rams, because we found that it's getting very expensive to go and buy a lot of good quality flock rams. So we're now running a little bit of a private stud here, and we're buying sires to try and breed real good quality flock rams to use in our flock. We purchased this sire here, and I just wanted to point out, as Mark and Luke have already mentioned, the eye muscle and the fat on this ram is really good. We see this ram as a really good package ram. It's got excellent fat qualities there and really good eye muscle qualities, and those are the two things that we look for the most. If we go into a ram sale, we like to get the catalogue 3 or 4 days or a week before, and we go through that catalogue and generally pick out 10 or 15 rams on these ASBVs only before we even get there. And it gives us a bit of an idea what we're looking for, and I think these figures are really good. That one's a 19.6 micron, and our flock average is 19.5, so he suits us perfectly there. But what we're looking for up here in this country, as I mentioned, is pretty harsh environment. We're looking for survivability. Sheep that can survive and ewes that can rear lambs, and lambs that can mature early and survive in this part of the world. We want to, even though we supplement a lot, we want sheep that are going to take advantage of that money that we pour into that supplementation to really produce a good animal. And this ram here we feel is a really good package ram, with good fat, good eye muscle, good dual purpose index, good scrotal figures, and the worm count. We don't, like we wouldn't look at the worm count first by any means. That is a bonus for us. There's a general consensus of opinion that this area doesn't have a big worm problem. I tend to disagree with that a little bit. I think there's probably more worms here than people think there are, so that is a big bonus to buy a sire with that. Moving on to the next slide, that ram up the top is the ram that's on that introductory page. Again, got good fat and good eye muscle depth and a good dual purpose index. He is a really good sire for our purposes. We have bought this year also some Parkdale rams. We went down to Parkdale at Dubbo and bought some. And the reason we did that is because we have a density problem in our sheep, wool density. So we were looking to improve the density on those sheep, and we wanted to try and breed some young rams that potentially will improve that density for us. These rams aren't as good in the carcass as those Karbula rams, but they're still positive for fat and eye muscle, which is pretty good, makes them a fairly good package, I feel, for the purposes that we're trying to use them for. I keep stressing the survivability because there's no point in having good wool or good density on a dead animal. So the eye muscle and the fat are the two that we really look for to try and breed good animals that have good survivability. We obviously look at the micron as well and the dual purpose index. We've been body weighing each year now when we class our young ewes. We've been weighing each and every one of those over the scales, and then selecting the tops out of those to be joined to these size to breed flock rams for our own purposes. And we're finding a big variation there, and we're finding that we're starting to get some really top ewes starting to come through. And just by looking at our flock now, we're starting to see some really good breeding ewes come through. There's still a slight tail there that we've probably slapped the class out. They're still lambing very well. We just finished lamb marking last Friday. We averaged 106% of lambs, which was the best lambing we've ever had in 57 years. We had our little private stud that we've got 280 odd ewes, and we had ewes in there that lambed up to 133%. And that's some of them there. Those ewes there were joined to a couple of sires to produce some young rams for us. You can see by the condition of those ewes that they're doing very nicely. The lambs are doing nicely. Admittedly, they're being supplemented on some grain feeders, but we feel that we're doing that supplementation to the right animal through selection. And these little guys are by the rams similar to what we've listed before, with all those good ASBVs. And that particular mob there, 133% on them. So that's the same mob again. So we're really encouraged by some of the rams we bought this year with the ASBVs. Obviously we don't use ASBVs only. As I said, we look at the catalogue before we go. Usually when we get there, what we look at the catalogue is thrown us all out again. We start again, but mostly we're looking for a real good dense wool on a really good carcass type animal that's going to mature early and have that good fat cover, and pass that fat cover and eye muscle onto their progeny, onto their ewe progeny, so that those ewes, young ewes down the track, have got the ability to rear their lambs. And that's what we want in this harsh environment, is sheep that can actually rear that progeny for us and go on to produce plenty of sheep down the track. If we go back 10 or 15 years to the type of sheep we had, we weren't getting anywhere near the results we've got now, excuse me, or the lambings, you know. That's just a phenomenal lambing for this area, as far as I'm concerned. I don't have a great deal more, Alec, to offer. I'm quite happy to answer questions if people have any, but that's about our story. I think we're very lucky that there's stud breeders out there, like Mark, that have done all the work, and people like Luke that have done all the work to bring this science, I suppose, to our you know, available to us guys, because it's got tremendous potential to improve the sheep. And we just feel that I just feel that people need to get on board really quick, as soon as they possibly can, and they'll be very happy with the improvement that they will get by using those, or studying those ASBVs and learning what they mean, because they've certainly had a big influence on our flock, and a big influence now on our ram decisions, ram buying decisions, I should say, and I think they've got the potential to take our sheep only one way, and that's up. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Pat, for that presentation. It was very good. Does anyone have any questions for Pat or any of the other speakers today?
Yeah, just starting as an absolute beginner on this, I didn't even know what it stood for, those initials, to tell you the truth. But is there somewhere a chart or thing that tells me the weight, the measurements that we are seeing on that screen at the moment? Obviously some of them would be millimetres, but the weight one, is that 7.5 watts? Yeah, there would be a chart or something to say that, yes?
I can get this one, sorry guys. Yeah, so Hamish, yeah, so we have a pocket guide which is similar to a glove box guide that we've developed with explaining ASBVs, and they'll basically, what that is, something that you can take with you to every sale, and they'll basically give you that, what they are talking about, what units of measurement. So weight, we're talking about kilos, fat and muscle millimetres, worm, it counts a percentage, clean fleece weight percentage, scrotal circumference millimetres.
Okay. I'll get hold of that, thank you.
Yeah, Hamish, if you do want to get one of them, either talk to Luke or myself, we can both get them to you. So, any other questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, I just had a question for Pat. Were those lambing percentages out of scanned-in lamb ewes or overall?
Yeah, John, that 133 was in, so we've got about 300 ewes, as I said, in our flock. We've got 3 mobs in that flock. There was 100 ewes, about 95 ewes in that mob that I showed the photos of. There was 133% in that. We had another mob, a frame, what we call a frame mob, was 120. We had a little that picture at the front there where that Karbula ram was joined to those maiden ewes. They had exactly 100% on those. And in our flocks we had 4 mobs of flocks, and they varied from 90 to 117. And the 90 was our young maiden ewes. Our 09 maiden ewes were 90%. That was the worst one we had. So they were all scanned ewes, obviously. We scanned those back in June, and they scanned 93% pregnant at that time, average 93%, and then they lambed out very well. So we're very happy with the result.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'd just like to make it consistent, and that's what I was talking before about, all that feeding system we've just set up, and what Luke said about the genetics and the environment. And there's no point in paying a lot of money for really good genetics, I feel, if you can't look after the damn thing. So our family have opted to spend a bit of money to set ourselves up to try and look after them. You know, if you get 93% scanned in lamb, well, you want to and it gets really dry like it does here, and we lamb August, September, so it's dry most years at that time. But we want to be able to take advantage of that and help those sheep along, you know, and certainly worked well this year, but I wouldn't get too excited about it until we could pull it off quite a few years in a row. That'll be the next challenge.
All right, thanks, Pat. Luke, I think I'll throw this question to you. There's a question from James Hetherington, and it says, how do you use ASBVs to compare rams from different year drops?
Yep, so how we do that, James, is that we compare across years as well. The main reason and how we're able to do that is we have, you know, sires that are used across years. So, you know, obviously if a stud likes a sire and they're throwing good progeny, they'll use it again. And that's the basis for sort of how the whole system works, is one ram being used, whether it be multiple year drops, whether it's in, you know, different flocks, etc. It gives us the ability to sort of map and look at how all those animals compare relative to those linked sires, which then, yeah, so yeah, you can look at older rams compared to younger rams, you know, whether it is that you're looking at an AI program or not, in terms of selecting some older rams to use, and that's the benefit of this system, particularly for someone like Mark who might be, you know, looking at an AI program and looking at you know, sires that have really done well in industry for his breeding objective, both now and in the past.
Luke, I've got a question. How many studs do you think, like on a percentage, should be using ASBVs, like across, you know, as a percentage of all studs?
If we're looking at merino studs, we're probably talking about maybe about 12-13% of studs registered with the stud merino breeders. But when we look at in terms of rams sold, we're talking about 35 to 40% of rams sold nationally. So yeah, there are a lot of studs that aren't members that also aren't that very big. Whereas we do have, you know, a couple of fairly sizable flocks that do sell a lot of rams that aren't in merino select.
Yeah.
And if we look at our lamb...
Sorry, you go. Keep going.
Sorry, if we look at lamb plan, you know, lamb plan's obviously a lot simpler thing that and has been around in the industry for roughly 20 years. So we're talking about 80% of terminal rams sold in Australia each year, with about 60% of maternal rams.
Yep. Another question for, I guess, the producer getting into it, starting off, would you, and Mark and Pat can comment on this as well, would you just choose like one or two traits, I guess, and stick with them to start with, or what's what do you find people doing?
Yeah, look, I think, you know, for whether it be if it's a new stud, they might only, they're going to measure what they normally measure, so I'll get a body weight, fleece weight and a fibre test. Yeah, for a commercial person going in, I'd be looking definitely at that weight component, particularly if you are sort of in Queensland and looking at a dual purpose thing as well as muscle and fat. That'd be the three traits I would look at, and then just making sure that fleece weight's not negative, so you're still, you know, getting a good ball clip.
Alex, I'll back up what Luke just said there. Fat and muscle, to me, are the two really important ones. Weight is obviously important, but if you get the fat and muscle right, then bingo, the rest comes along. And what tends to happen at our sales is that new people coming in, the older clients have been with us for a while, are perfectly happy to, like, we'll walk a new person through it, but it's information overload. There's a lot of information there, and they'll struggle with it. What we do is we then utilise some of our clients and let them walk them through it as to how they use it, and then come back half an hour later, and you'll find they're starting to get the gist of it, and they're working in their own mind, or they're working out in their own mind as to how they can better utilise it. And there's a lot of data here. Just a few of the simple ones here on this sheet that Pat put up. There's twins. James Hetherington was here a while ago. James tends to buy rams that are twins. The 4-teater bit is directly linked to production. There's more weight, more lambs in used that have 4 teats. So there's plenty of stuff there that's on the periphery, let alone just weight, fat, muscle, and worms. and all your wool traits as well.
Right, and I'd just like to thank all three presenters, Luke, Mark and Pat, for their time. I know you've all got your own businesses and work and stuff, so I appreciate you guys putting the time aside to get the presentations together and talking to everyone today, so I really appreciate that. And also for leading sheep and making more for sheep projects for bringing you today's webinar. Thanks everyone, and we'll talk to you soon.